Hello, I am Mia, a 29-year-old civil servant. My brother, Brandon, is 22 and just graduated from university this year. He often brags about his company being more famous and successful than the rural city office where I work. Must be Dad's genes, right? I've got the blood of a dad who worked for a major corporation. Yeah, very impressive. Brandon often brings up the matter of inheriting our father's traits. Although we share the same mother, we have different fathers. Brandon is the child of our current father and mother, while I am the child of my mother and her ex-husband. Although I'm technically a stepchild, Dad never despised me for it and cared for me deeply. I don't really remember my biological father much, as he ran away with his affair partner when I was little. Thus, I regard my current dad as my true father. When Brandon was younger, he never mentioned that I was a stepchild or that we had different fathers. However, when I was an adult and he was still in middle school, our mother died in a car accident. Unable to cope without blaming someone, Brandon convinced himself that it was my fault. At the funeral, he cried out, "Why did Mom have to die? It would have been better if it were you." No one would be troubled if the step-sibling were gone. No matter how shocked he was, hearing such words made me lose any affection I had for my brother. I wanted to argue back at such a harsh statement, but our father, who I had never seen so angry, scolded Brandon fiercely. So, I chose to remain silent. Naturally, my relationship with Brandon deteriorated. Initially, he tried to surpass me academically, but aiming too high, he failed to get into his first-choice schools for both high school and university. He couldn't outrun me either, as I was a full-time employee and he was just a student working part-time. There were plenty of other fields, like sports or the arts, where he could have competed, but fearing failure, he stopped taking any challenges. Since blood relation was an undeniable fact, he thought he could dominate by poking at that, without any need for effort. Eventually, Brandon just kept mocking me for being a stepchild and not the real child of our father. It was probably just misplaced anger from losing our mother at first, but as he grew up, he genuinely started to believe, Dad and I are the real family, and my sister is an outsider. Since my sister is a stepchild, I have a higher standing than her. I grew tired of dealing with such a selfish brother. He would provoke me unilaterally, lose by his own measures, and then get angry. I became so exhausted dealing with him that I started to dismiss him carelessly. When Brandon chose to commute to university from home, I moved out to live alone in an apartment. When I would come back home, I made sure to coordinate with Dad to visit when Brandon wasn't around. 4 years later, Brandon graduated from university and managed to get a job at a fairly renowned local company. I had prepared a tie as a graduation gift. Of course, I got a job at a much better and more famous company than the city office where you work as a civil servant, he boasted. Because I have the blood of a dad who works for a major corporation. His character apparently hadn't changed, even after 4 years at university. I decided against giving him the gift. I continued to live alone and commute to work, while he lived with our father and faced the rough waves of society as a new working adult. That lifestyle didn't last even a year before Dad suddenly fell ill. There were no signs when we talked on the phone the night before. He passed away so suddenly that I didn't even have time to say goodbye. At the funeral, I served as the chief mourner. Thanks to Dad's prior arrangements, outlining what was needed and which procedures to follow, everything except the inheritance was smoothly handled. The problem was the inheritance. The only living inheritors were Brandon and me. I had a feeling that discussing it would inevitably lead to conflict. I found some documents about the inheritance in Dad's room, but I knew they wouldn't be followed exactly. Brandon arrived over 30 minutes late for our meeting without apologizing and immediately said something outrageous. The inheritance. I'm the real child, so I'll take it all. You, as a stepchild, are just an outsider. Isn't it greedy for an outsider to claim the inheritance? Brandon kept laughing about being the real child and monopolizing the inheritance. I was so tired of dealing with him all my life that I put forward a condition and promised to renounce my share. I won't inherit anything from Dad, I stated. In return, you must never contact me for the rest of your life, no matter what. Are you stupid? Like I'd ever contact you, he scoffed. Don't expect anything from me later. Just disappear. Disgusted, I stood up to leave while Brandon just kept smirking. I fondly remembered how cute he was as a child as I walked away. The next day, I went to a law office to proceed with the legal aspects of the renunciation of inheritance. Mia, you said you don't have any inheritance rights since you are a stepchild of your father, the lawyer said. Actually, Dad formally adopted me, I replied, so I do have rights to inherit his property. But I don't want anything anymore. I'll renounce the inheritance. The lawyer's acknowledgement came as I interrupted him. Although I hadn't mentioned it to Brandon, Dad had officially adopted me after marrying my mother. Therefore, even though we weren't blood-related, we truly were parent and child. I was fully aware of everything Dad owned from the estate investigation. Still, I wanted to free myself from the complications of being labeled a stepchild or a legitimate child, so I chose to give up everything. A month later, the lawyer informed me that the family court had accepted my renunciation of the inheritance. Reluctantly, I contacted Brandon. Hello, my renunciation of the inheritance is complete. You know, from the estate investigation, Dad had. Brandon cut me off, shouting, "Shut up. I get it, you've renounced the inheritance. Stop acting like a real sister and don't ever contact me again." He hung up before I could say another word. I sighed deeply, knowing that, eventually, Brandon would come crying back. 3 months passed, and then the calls and emails started flooding in. At first, I ignored them, but when they became relentless, I finally picked up. His voice sounded exhausted. "You know what? I need to borrow some money," he muttered. "Dad had debts, and I can't keep up with the repayments. I used Dad's savings too, but it's not enough." "What?" I asked, taken aback. "Sure, Dad had some loans to repay, but if you used all his savings for it, it shouldn't be this bad." Brandon immediately snapped. "Did you know about this? Did you push the debt onto me, knowing all this? You have such a bad personality." "Oh, right, because you're just a stepchild, you must be jealous of me, the legitimate child." I let out a dry laugh. "The legitimate child who hung up the phone when I tried to tell you. Who blocked my calls. And yet, you unblocked me when you got into trouble. Who's really the one with the bad personality here?" I had known about Dad's financial situation, including his significant debts, as part of my renunciation process handled by the lawyer. I had tried to inform Brandon, but he had cut off all communication. So, I left it at that. As expected, he ended up coming to me in tears. "Sure, Dad worked for a big company, but can you imagine how hard it was to send you to high school and college? There was educational insurance and Mom's life insurance, but things like the house and car had to be paid with loans," I said coldly. "But I'm not your sister, right? You should talk to the mortgage lender or the lawyer instead of me, an outsider." "What are you talking about? Don't sweat the small stuff." Brandon scoffed. "Besides, I'm treating you like a sister even though you're just a stepchild, so be happy about it. Come on, Mia, give me some money." His smug tone made my blood boil. Furious, I hung up sharply and blocked his number. He didn't know where I lived, and I had made sure to leave no clues behind at our father's house. Just to be safe, I even got a new phone. I thought that would stop him. I was wrong. "Mia, please, please. I need money, otherwise, I can't survive." Brandon started showing up at the city office where I worked. Unlike his usual arrogance, he now looked genuinely desperate. He came repeatedly during lunch breaks, sneaking away from his job. On the days he didn't visit, he called non-stop, disrupting my work. I explained the situation to my boss, who moved me to an administrative position, but that didn't stop him. He started waiting past closing hours, refusing to leave until he saw me after work. One evening, I caught him waiting in the parking lot. I grabbed his arm and dragged him away. "Stop it already. Don't cause trouble at my workplace," I hissed. "I told you to consult the loan institutions and the lawyer." His fake politeness vanished. Crossing his arms, he glared down at me. "I already consulted them, okay? The group credit life insurance covered the house, so I don't have to pay for that anymore. The car still had about $5,000 left, but I negotiated to reduce the monthly repayments and keep it." "Then you're not really struggling to survive," I said, narrowing my eyes. "Dad only had those 2 loans. What exactly are you begging for money for?" His anger softened, and he suddenly looked around nervously. When I pressed him further, he finally admitted, "Actually, Dad had quite a bit of savings, so I spent it on various things and went over budget. I borrowed money from a friend, but now I can't pay it back. That guy is going around saying I scammed him, so now I can't borrow from anyone else. If I can't borrow from friends, I'll have to go to predatory lenders. Then I'll have to repay with borrowed money, and I can't make ends meet." I exhaled deeply, rubbing my temples. His story was ridiculous, but I understood the mess he was in. "You mean you kept borrowing money to repay debts and now you're stuck?" I asked. "Yeah, that's it," he admitted. "I think I'm already on the blacklist or something. I can't borrow anymore. If you pay, it'll all be over." He extended his hand toward me. "So, Mia, give me $88,000. I slapped his hand away. Brandon rubbed his hand and glared at me angrily. "Why can't you help me out when I'm asking like this? Is it because we're only half-blood related? That's why you don't care about your brother, right? Stepchildren are really the worst, so unpleasant." I got into my car and started the engine. Brandon desperately tried to cling to me, but I shoved his hand away. "You promised never to contact me again in exchange for taking the entire inheritance," I reminded him. "You break promises, beg for money, and on top of that, you're rude and foolish." And with that, I drove away, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot. "I don't have a single penny for you. If you come again, I'll call the police." Brandon called out to me repeatedly, "Mia. Mia." But I ignored him. Pressing down on the accelerator, I drove away, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot. After that, he continued coming to City Hall, lingering until closing time, and harassing various departments with his endless calls, morning and evening. Thanks to his persistence, he quickly became one of the top problematic individuals at City Hall. As long as I was there, he was a constant nuisance. Since he never raised his voice or caused an outright scene at the front desk, it was difficult to file a formal complaint against him. Reporting him would have taken more time and effort than simply disappearing. "Where's Mia?" "She's no longer at City Hall." Brandon's usual visit to the counter took an unexpected turn when a staff member casually informed him that I had quit and received my severance pay. Panic flashed across his face as he frantically tried to find out where I had gone. However, with strict privacy policies protecting employees' addresses and contact details, there was no way for him to get that information. Frustrated and unable to locate me, Brandon began wandering suspiciously around the area. His behavior raised concerns, and eventually, he was reported as a suspicious individual. Unable to gather the money by his repayment deadline, he was forced to pay his debts little by little each month, with considerable late fees piling up. I heard about this from a young man Brandon had previously borrowed from and failed to repay. It seems that, in the end, his debts caught up with him, his wages were garnished, and he could no longer keep up with his repayments to other lenders. The once arrogant brother who used to strut around without a care was now forced to live modestly. As for me, I never actually quit City Hall. The city I worked in had been formed by merging several smaller towns, and the old town hall still functioned as a branch office. After explaining my situation to the personnel department, I was transferred to a remote branch in the mountains until things settled down. At first, I had planned to return to my former department once Brandon's issues were resolved, but over time, I found my work here far more fulfilling. The mountain area had fewer residents and was always short-staffed. Being closer to the people here, I felt I could truly help them in ways I never could before. When I tell people I have no family left, they treat me with kindness. The sadness of losing both my mother and father never fully fades, but at least I am free from the burden of being labeled.